good afternoon or good evening, depending where you are. I'm delighted to welcome you to this fantastic panel discussion on forced labour fashion. I'm Joanna Hewitt-James, the Executive Director of Freedom United, your host this evening. And today is International Day for the Abolition of Slavery, and we still have plenty to do. So I'd like to thank you all for joining our special panel event on one of the most serious modern slavery crises of our time, the system of forced labour that traps vast numbers of Uyghurs and other Turkic and Muslim people in northwest China. Freedom United's Free Uyghurs campaign was launched in April, and our petition has since gathered nearly 60,000 signatures. We're proud that we're one of the first civil society organisations to launch a public-facing campaign on this issue. And we're also on the steering committee of the Coalition to End Forced Labour in the Uyghur region, which in July launched a call to action for brands to exit the region. So today's event falls on the third day of the Forced Labour Fashion Week of Action. So this is a week of activities and digital campaign that we've organised along with some of our coalition partners to highlight that Zara, its parent company Inditex, and the global fashion industry profit from Uyghur forced labour. The goal of today's event is to explore the links between our clothes and Uyghur forced labour, and we're grateful to be joined by some really excellent panellists to help us do just that. So now I'm going to hand over to our Advocacy Officer at Freedom United, Carlo Ladd, who'll be moderating today. Over to you, Carlo.
Thanks so much, Joanna, and welcome everybody to our event tonight. To briefly go over the structure of the event tonight, I'm just going to briefly introduce the panelists, and then I will direct some questions to each panelist before moving on to we've already had lots of audience questions sent in ahead of time. At any point during, you can send them in to the Q&A box or the chat at the bottom of the Zoom window. We're also live streaming on Facebook, so you can see it there or direct anybody to see it there. And anybody posting on social, we'd love you to share that this event is happening. Please use the hashtag forced labor fashion and our handle, which is Freedom United HQ. So I'm really pleased that today we're joined by a wonderful panel. We have Raphaël Glucksmann, a member of European Parliament, a journalist, director, and a really prominent voice on the Uyghur crisis in Europe. We have Chloe Cranston, business and human rights manager at Anti-Slavery International, our partner organization. We have Jewher Ilham, program associate at another partner of ours, the Worker Rights Consortium, and the daughter of imprisoned Uyghur scholar Ilham Tohti. And we also have Rahima Mahmut, an Uyghur activist and UK project director at our partner, another partner organization, the World Uyghur Congress. So I'd like to thank all our panelists so much for joining us tonight. We're really grateful to have you here. And I think we should jump right into the discussion so we could use our time as well as we can. I'd like to direct my first question to Rahima. And I was just wondering, Rahima, if you could tell us a little bit about the Uyghur region and give us some context on the situation that we're seeing there today.
Thank you very much. Thanks for organizing this event, and it's an honor for me to be with such distinguished panel. The Uyghur region, the Uyghurs call it East Turkestan, and it's a historical homeland for the Uyghurs and other Turkic Muslims. In 1949, the Communist Party occupied the region, and in 1955, it was named so-called Xinjiang Uyghur Autonomous Region. However, they never honored what it was promised under the Chinese constitution. Uyghurs subjected to systematic oppression, and the SACP has carried out many massacres: rightist movement, cultural revolution, Baran massacre, Gulja massacre, and Urumqi massacre in 2009. And then since 2014, and it developed into what Canada's parliament declared as constitutes genocide under the Genocide Convention. So right now, up to 3 million people are interned in concentration camps. There is widespread slave labor, forced organ harvesting, forced sterilization of women, with removal of nearly 1 million children from their families into state orphanages, forbidding them speak language, practice our own culture and tradition and our religion. And advanced digital surveillance and biometric underpins the genocide. Simple acts like phoning relatives abroad, using WhatsApp, growing beard, owning a Quran, or praying results in arrest and internment. So the CCP's aim is, from their own words, break their lineage, break their roots, break their connections and their origins. So this is what is happening in my homeland at the moment.
Thank you so much for that horrifying overview, Rahima. Jewher, perhaps you can lead the discussion on to discuss the coalition to end forced labor in the Uyghur region. How did it come about? Where does it come in? And what are we hoping to do?
Thank you, Carlo. As Ms. Rahima Mahmut just talked about, that the situation of the Uyghurs are very concerning, extremely concerning, and that is why a group of human rights organizations have joined together and created a coalition. And this coalition is a very broad, diverse coalition with members from all over the world, from more than 35 countries, which includes Uyghur solidarity groups, investor groups, trade unions, and human rights organizations. And so far, there's a solution that has been endorsed by more than 310 plus organizations, the call to action. And the call to action was launched in July of this year and has been taking the lead from Uyghur groups and Uyghur diaspora groups around the world. And we all came together because we were seeing that we were seeing what a huge risk forced labor poses, and in global garment supply chains. We wanted to respond to that, and that is why we developed this call to action.
Thank you, Jewher. And I'd just like to remind everybody that 1/5 of the world's cotton supply is estimated to come from the Uyghur region. So it is the risk for the global fashion industry is pretty vast. Chloe, perhaps you can answer this question. Why do we need brands? Why do we need fashion brands to exit the region completely? What is stopping this issue from being solved with diplomacy?
Thanks, Carlo, and thank you to Freedom United for inviting me. It really is such an honor to be speaking alongside such formidable figures of the Uyghur movement. So thank you for having me join them. Rahima has really described the scale and the scope of the abuses and how horrifying it is. And what we're talking about is we're talking about forced labor at such a scale that there really is a risk in any workplace in the Uyghur region, whether we're talking about factories or an agricultural level on farms. This fact has been recognized by the industry. It's been recognized, for example, as well by the US government. Given the role of government, yes, of course, diplomacy is fundamental, and that's something we can't argue against. Governments need to be exerting influence and pressure on the Chinese government to end these abuses overall, and we need to be pushing for, particularly in the UN. I'll leave the diplomatic side, though, however, to Mr. Glucksmann, who I feel will be able to speak to that a bit better than I can. However, what is really key and really important to underline is we cannot rely on diplomacy alone. Even while governments may be being slow to act, brands have a responsibility to respect human rights in their supply chains and to ensure they are not profiteering from forced labor. And in some countries, this is actually a legal responsibility. And what companies need to be able to do is to reassure us as consumers that we aren't wearing products that have been made off the back of abuses of Uyghurs. For example, even what I'm wearing here today. As Carlos said, the horrifying and staggering figure is that 1/5 of all cotton products sold globally could be made with cotton from the region. And there's a really near certainty that many of these products will be tainted with the forced labor. It doesn't matter whether we're talking about our everyday high street brand or whether we're talking about a luxury company. Further, a number of companies which we may buy products from the high street or luxury have suppliers among their supplier base, which are major Chinese companies which are actually propping up the Chinese government's efforts to expand the forced labor system. So we have brands and retailers which are in supplier relationships, which are very directly linked to the abuses. And brands, so they cannot just sit around and wait for governments to act. We don't know how long that will take. They have a responsibility to ensure they're not benefiting. And in the Uyghur region, the only way they can do this is by exiting the region. The scale and the scope of the abuses means that forced labor is so across the entire region that they just have to operate with the presumption that any products made in whole or in part from the Uyghur region could be tainted with forced labor. I'm happy to go into more detail about why we're very specifically calling for an exit in next questions as well.
Thanks, Chloe. I think that leads us very nicely on to a contribution from Mr. Glucksmann. Clearly, the coalition, from what the coalition has put out there and from what we've been talking about, brands need to take action. Brands need to exit the region. So where does diplomacy come in, and how can it be part of the solution? In your experience in the European Parliament, what's your perspective on the issue?
Well, first, thank you so much for inviting me, and I'm very much honored and happy to be with you. You know, I think in terms of diplomacy, Uyghurs have fallen into a black hole. And especially when we speak about Europe, there is a shameful lack of consistency when it comes to defend their right to exist as a people. And the camp should be closed, and Europe should be leading voice for closing them. But Europe is not. So as we speak, the pressure on the Chinese government is way too low. And there is no concrete steps taken by the European leadership to actually oblige the Chinese government to stop these horrific crimes against humanity. And so, of course, what we want European leadership to do is to take sanctions, individual sanctions against responsible of the crackdown against Uyghurs, but also sanctions against companies using forced labor and slavery. And with 100 MEPs, members of European Parliament, we have signed a letter asking for a blacklist of Chinese companies using forced labor and slavery. And I don't know if you call it diplomacy, but we need very strong messages coming from European and American and democratic institutions. And the first thing to do is to ban slavers from access to the European market. It's still the biggest market in the world, and China needs the access to the European market. So that's a leverage we have. But for that, we need to be very coherent and consistent. And the first thing to do will be to ban any product coming from Uyghur cotton, any product coming from companies like Wafu in China using Uyghur forced labor, and any product coming from multinational companies, fashion brands, including European ones, using Wafu as a supplier, for instance. And this is the message we want. But until we have that, what we can do is to put pressure on the brands and use consumers, clients, to send messages to the brand. It's to, as we all know, fashion brands, they have built their business model on two things. First is to look for the lower cost. So that's why they work with these suppliers. And second is their image as a brand. So let's attack this image. That's our leverage. That's their Achilles, I don't know the name in English, talon. But that's why these campaigns are so important. We need actually Zara and other fashion brands to understand that at least cooperating with forced labor in China will have a cost to them. And for this, we need citizens to act. And that's why I think it's very important that we can coordinate our efforts in various countries in the world and to spread the message. That's the first thing. And then we might have diplomatic actions. But I think that first, the thing is to target the brands and to show that we have leverage on these brands and they have leverage on their suppliers.
Thank you so much, Mr. Glucksmann, and your support of the movement and the coalition in Europe and in the European Parliament has really been indispensable. So we're very grateful for that. And what I'm hearing is that you're calling partly for consistency because the European Parliament has perhaps spoken out on other issues of exploitation. And I guess maybe bouncing back to Chloe, perhaps you could talk to us a little bit about how what's happening in the Uyghur region is different from, shall we say, more commonplace supply chain exploitation or more well-known types of supply chain exploitation. And how are the solutions different?
Yeah, thank you, Carlo. It's a really pertinent question, actually. So as Anti-Slavery International, we, with our local partners and partners around the world, we work on forced labor around the world in many contexts. Forced labor exists in the UK, exists in Brazil, India, any context. And in most cases, in most countries, we would not be saying that companies should exit a region entirely or end all relationships with suppliers. That wouldn't be the practice we would actually promote. In most cases and contexts, what we would be saying is that brands and retailers need to be working really closely with their suppliers to address why forced labor is happening, to support workers, to be working with NGOs, so charities and trade unions, and for example, on the ground. That is the approach we normally push for in order to make sure that what happens is in the interest of the workers. The Uyghur region, it's a completely different scenario. As has been made clear, we're talking about state-imposed forced labor. This forced labor is taking place within an extensive system of surveillance and control. There's widespread restrictions and repressions on fundamental freedoms. There's no civil society. Rahima made very clear the level of atrocities we're talking about in the region. And we're talking about a scale of persecution that legal experts have stated may amount to crimes against humanity. And there's open legal opinion as to whether this can be defined as genocide. So a company can't take steps in the Uyghur region to try and deal with the forced labor and support workers. That simply is not credible. There's absolutely no credibility to such an argument. As an example, one way that some companies in other contexts may try and address forced labor is through the use of audits. So what audits are, for those of you less involved in industry space, is they're factory visits where auditors will go into a factory and interview a worker and inspect conditions. They are very, very flawed in every single context and really generally in any context fail to actually identify forced labor, which is often very hidden. But in the Uyghur region especially, they have absolutely zero credibility. No Uyghur trapped in forced labor is going to be able to speak to an investigator about what is happening to them due to the level of persecution. And actually recognizing this in September, 5 well-known auditing companies stated that they would no longer audit factories in the Uyghur region. This was a really welcome development for us in the movement. Very ironically, and showing how flawed audits are, 2 of these companies had previously actually audited factories for Western companies in the region and allegedly found those abuses. Those 2 factories that have since actually been subject to US sanctions or import bans. So it just shows that the audits weren't working. And beyond audits, what else could companies do in the region? Even if a company was to identify forced labor, there's nothing they can do to prevent it or to provide remedy to workers. We have a situation, are the suppliers, so the factories on the ground, are they going to be listening to the Chinese government of what they were going to do? Or are they going to be listening to fashion industry? They're going to be listening to the Chinese government. And due to that lack of leverage, that lack of control, the only way that companies can make sure that they're having no links to these forced labor is to completely exit the region, to make sure their cotton, their yarn, and their fabric does not come from the region, and to make sure they're not in relationships with any suppliers which are indirectly or directly linked to the region. That is the only thing they can do. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Zoe. That's extremely helpful explanation. Just wanted to say that one of our participants actually just said that they had to leave the event for a weekly Uyghur demonstration in Hampstead in London outside the Volkswagen showrooms. So just a reminder that although we're talking about cotton today and garments, this is such a vast system that it encompasses many, many industries. So while that is our focus today, I just want to point out that there are numerous other industries that are implicated. So, Mr. Glucksmann, I'd like to ask you another question that comes up pretty often. A common allegation or question directed towards the movement to end forced labor in the Uyghur region is that it exists in some way solely to represent American interests. Perhaps also because the American government has been one of the most vocal governments on this issue. But as a member of the European Parliament, what's your response to this assumption or allegation?
I mean, is it American interest to stop slavery and to fight for people that park in concentration camps and used as slaves? Is it an American interest or is it a human interest? And if we Europeans define this as an American interest and not a European interest too, then I'm really ashamed to be European. If it's not in my interest to know that my shirt and my pulley and my shoe is not built by concentration camps prisoners and slaves, then who am I as a European? So I don't think it's American interest, and I don't care actually about American interest. I don't care about why the American government took this decision or that decision. The only thing I'm caring about is these people in concentration camps. The only thing I'm caring about is that I am not contributing to a crime against humanity by buying a shirt to my kid or by buying a shoe to myself or my wife. That's the thing I care about. And this is a human interest. It's not an American interest or a European interest. And when we speak about about interest, because of course, when you speak about politics and when you speak about diplomacy, interests have to be taken account. I'm not a crazy utopist. Yes, I know that countries do things out of interest. So what I'm trying to tell European leaders is, do you really believe that being weak in front of such a regime, do you really believe that it's in European interest? Do you think that allowing such a system based on slavery, a mix between the worst of capitalism and the worst of communistic repression system, do you think that allowing this system to grow without being checked or contained is in your interest as European? Don't you think that one day you will pay your weakness and your compromisions and your abandon of your own principles and values? So I don't think it's an American interest. I think first it's the interest of people who are parked in concentration camps. And second, it's the interest of any form of human being. And it's my selfish interest as a consumer, as a person who is believing in some principles, not to be part of this scheme of crimes, not to be taken hostages by this globalization process and by this regime in China parking people in concentration camps. Because, I mean, as a European especially, I've been raised with the idea that this word concentration camp was part of our history and that it should never come back again to haunt us. And now what we are learning is that in fact it's a 21st century war thanks to the Chinese regime. And if we don't believe it's in our interest to defend these people and to fight against the brands that are using them, exploiting them, making money out of their reduction to slavery, then, I mean, we might have interest I don't understand, but that's not the Europe I want. So I think it's our common interest. And whether American government took this decision or that decision for this or that reason is not my problem. The only thing I'm judging a decision about is, does it help people parked in concentration camp or does it harm them? And I'm sure that having a hard position on this, being strong on principle, it's helping those who are in camps. Because at the end of the day, that's the only way we have to be understood by the Chinese authorities and to be taken seriously by the Chinese authorities when we raise the Uyghur issue. It's not by having a nice diplomatic tone in a 4 hours meeting and waiting for the Chinese official to go to pee and in order to raise with a slow voice and a lot of politeness the word Uyghur that we will achieve something. And if that's Europe, then that's not my interest to have a Europe like that. So I don't care if it's American interest. I only care about Uyghurs' interest in this case.
Thank you, Mr. Glucksmann. That's very powerfully said. I think what a lot of people are wondering as we're talking about all these mechanisms to address this issue is what does success look like? What in a kind of realistic best case scenario, how could this lead to the situation resolving? And what might that resolution look like? Rahima, I'd like to direct this question to you, as perhaps you can help us understand where this could go if we keep the pressure up in the coming years.
Well, it's a very important question, and I know this campaign is one of many, part of one of many campaigns that I am taking part in. I know the coalition that we are calling for the brands to move out of the region, as Chloe already explained. But we also know just for all the brands moving out of region itself, it doesn't mean that can, the situation can improve, because the risk is because the Uyghurs are already enslaved. So Uyghur people has no right on the current CCP government. So when for example, if the factory moved out from the region to another province, that's simply they can move the workforce because these people are slaves. They have no right to agree or disagree. And so that is not the complete solution. But I agree that it will have a huge impact. Of course, for any campaign, you need to have step-by-step solution. And that is one of the very important steps. But for me to see the campaign long-term success is that closure all the camps, release all the prisoners, restoration constitutionally guaranteed religious, cultural freedoms, and stop forced labor, sterilization, organ harvesting, family separation, allow contact with families. For example, I cannot even contact my family dare not contact me. I don't know what happened to them for the last 4 years. I'm not the only person. There are 90% Uyghurs living abroad, living in exile. We're all suffering. And the people in the Uyghur region, in East Turkestan, they are suffering. I cannot imagine you know, they always have hopes. I know they always think America or Europe or, you know, these countries gonna rescue us one day. But it's been almost 4 years now. 4 years, a long, long time. And I do really want to see there is some kind of breakthrough, you know, through all the campaigns. You know, we need to, of course, we are very, very upset about the government, but also as individuals, how much we've done so far. We need grassroots level of pressure, worldwide pressure. Make the campaign like anti-apartheid, the very, very big grassroots anti-apartheid campaign. In that way, I think maybe we can see some changes. So thank you for that question.
Thank you, Rahima. And we all really, 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 really hope for that breakthrough as well. And hope that the coalition comes to helps bring us to that breakthrough. Speaking of grassroots initiatives, Jewher, perhaps you can tell us a little bit about how the public can get involved. How can our participants today leave this event with an actionable item to do and contribute to ending this system of forced labor?
Today I'm speaking here as a member of Worker Rights Consortium, but also I'm speaking as a member of Uyghur community. Like Ms. Rahima mentioned earlier, majority of the Uyghurs overseas have family members are directly affected in this matter. And excuse me, the Uyghur communities have been calling for changes and for help for years, and it is not a new issue at all. I started my advocacy work for my family at the age of 19. And at that point, no one even knew who the Uyghurs were. And I felt really powerless, helpless, like no one would pay attention to what my family and my community's traumatic experiences, because people simply didn't know we existed or didn't believe we were suffering. Or to be accurate, up to this day, we're still suffering from such severe human rights abuses. And that is why I believe it is so important for people to support the Uyghur community in the diaspora and show them you're here for them, you're informed about the situation and willing to help and take lead from Uyghur groups, from people who are the most directly affected by what is happening in the Uyghur region. And there have been very inspiring mobilizations from students, influencers, advocates, politicians, and consumers around the world that have learned about this crisis and they're uniting together to hold brands accountable. One example is this week, there was a campaign launched by students, advocates, and influencers that are asking brands such as Zara to sign the call to action. And the week of action is happening right now at this moment. And this webinar is also part of this week of action. It is really great that you all are here and you're engaged and you're learning more. You can actually learn more of this week of action at forcedlaborfashion.org. I think it was listed in the chat section. If people are willing to learn more about the call to action and forced labor crisis in general, you can also visit UyghurForcedLabor.org, where you can learn what has been happening, what has been done on this matter, what can be done on this matter, and more information about the call to action terms. So the public needs to mobilize the part of the call to action and make sure that we shouldn't be taking anything less. Anything short of committing to the elements of the call to action is not enough to make sure that brands and retailers are not complicit in this crisis. So consumers, members of public, they need to rally around this call to action, and they need to take lead from Uyghur communities and basically respect that take stock of the immense work and advocacy that has gone into this. And a lot of people have come forward with their stories at great risk to themselves and families. That we're speaking here today may create a great risk for our own family members. And I really would like people to take their time to learn more on this issue and to acknowledge it and to take actions.
Thank you so much, Jewher. And we are immensely grateful for your participation in the panel today and for all our panelists speaking today. We now have a good amount of time for questions from our audience that have been coming in. Some people send them in ahead of time, and you can still send in questions now through the Q&A box or the chat box at the bottom of the Zoom screen. So I'd like to start with a question. Perhaps I'll direct it towards Mr. Glucksmann, who might be able to best answer this. How is the UN part of the solution here, and what is the UN doing on this?
Well, actually, the UN is not doing anything on this because of one simple reason. It's China is part of the Security Council, has a veto right. Same happens with Russia, which is actually supporting China. You have every year a letter signed by a huge number of countries in the UN, even congratulating China with its Uyghur policy, which is called Policy Against Radicalization. So it's de-radicalization policies. And the funny thing, I mean, it's actually not funny at all, and you want to cry when you see that, but or shout, is that many countries that label themselves as Muslims support the China crackdown on Uyghurs. You have countries like Pakistan organizing, for instance, state demonstrations in the streets against French cartoonists and supporting officially the crackdown of Uyghur and the fact that you can go to concentration camp because you read Quran or because you wish your family a happy Eid. So you have an abyss of hypocrisy, and nothing will come out from the UN, unfortunately. So that's why it's so important to have a European position on this. That's quite strong, because you have a huge silence around the world. And you know that huge crimes, in order to happen, they need huge silence. And this silence is enabling the criminals. And that's why we have to break it. And what you are doing today and what our friends, Uyghur friends, speaking tonight are so important for us, because these voices need to be heard, and we need to do everything we can to make people hear them, listen to the testimonies. People are speaking who were in the camps. I just spoke to a woman who was 1.5 years in a camp, and she wants to speak, but the question is, are we able to listen? And that's where the effort should be also, is to make sure that everybody knows what's happening there. And that's why these kind of campaigns are also so important. And second thing I would like to add, and why is it so important? It's because we all feel powerless. Yes, it's big China and it's a huge region, but we could do something as Europe or as US, because China needs us as much as we need them. And the second thing is, as human beings, witnessing these horrors, listening to these testimonies, we think we are powerless, yes? And we can have a fatalistic approach. But in fact, it's not true. If you tag Zara on Instagram, it can mean nothing. I mean, you can have the impression that it's even ridiculous as a small action. But if everybody does that, if we are tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands doing so, then we will have power. And we will have power on Zara. And we will have power on people who are supposed to lead our institutions, democratic institutions, and who want our votes. So let's make it an issue. President of France, Chancellor of Germany, President of Commission of Europe, they don't want it to be an issue. Okay, so let's make it an issue in public opinion. And then it will become an issue in diplomatic terms, because they care about what we have to say, even if they don't care about Uyghurs in camps. And this is why I think that these kind of campaigns are so important, and that you should never think that what you are doing, even if it's small, is useless. Everything has a purpose in this kind of fight.
Thank you, Mr. Glucksmann. We have another question here that I'd like to ask Rahima. Since you've spoken a lot to the media about this issue and shared your story a lot on the radio, TV, somebody's asking if the media is part of the problem. Is part of the problem that the media is not providing enough coverage on the issue? What would you say to that?
Well, part of the problem is not just the media, as I said. Media, of course, is a problem. I agree with that. There's also one of the reasons that, the reporters that I have spoken to time and time again, and basically because they couldn't report from the region, and they've been sourcing any kind of news stories, anything that is new. That's what they're interested. But whatever we have, most of the information has been reported. But the issue is we couldn't get enough information out of the region. That is one of the major problems in the end. And also we need to, as every citizen in the world, that we need to make that effort as well. I find it a waste of time about the whataboutism. People always talk about, what about Palestine? What about Kashmir? What about this? We are in this panel, we are talking about the Uyghur issue. So if you have other issues, then you can organize another panel, then maybe we can talk about that as well. So I think when you have this kind of whataboutism, then you ended up doing nothing. So I think we just have to try our best, rather than wasting time to criticize here and there, but how we can make a difference, how we can make a change, So that is the important thing that we have to do. I agree with you that the coverage is not enough when you compare the scale of what is happening there. As sadly, I know a lot of journalists approach me asking, is there any new development? Is there any new stories we want to cover? We want to cover stories about forced labor? Do you have any information, any kind of evidence about this PPE? Is there any way you can find this? This is the problem. The problem is China, because they control the region completely, and people cannot openly speak about it. Journalists couldn't go in there, and this is, I believe, is a fundamental problem here. And maybe other people, if they disagree with me, maybe they can add their opinion on this.
Thank you, Rahima. I think this leads very nicely on to another question from our audience here. Perhaps Jewher, you could speak on this, but anybody feel free to jump in. So with the current situation in the Uyghur region and how closed it is, how are we getting the information that we're hearing today, and how can we trust that it's accurate, given the closed nature of the way the Chinese government has organized the region?
Indeed, it is extremely difficult to get information out of the region. It is even hard for me to get information out from my own family members. So I understand why people have such questions, but Uyghur people have been finding creative ways to get the information out, with the researchers and experts' help by doing researches in the region and getting analyzing from Chinese government data. And just a few months ago, Chinese government has released their own white paper stating that over 1.29 million Uyghur people per year have been passing through vocational training. So with experts analyzing government data like this and leaked Chinese government papers, and with the satellite imagery analysis, and also testimonies from survivors, from family members of people who have been detained in camps. With those information, that's how we got how we are learning about what is happening in the Uyghur region. And also, I started learning before I joined WRC. I had to gather information from TikTok and Chinese social media apps, because that's where people were able to release videos of their detained family members. Unfortunately, the ways are limited, but we have mounting evidence that can prove the legitimacy of the crisis.
Thank you, Jewher. That's extremely helpful. Another question that I think Chloe might be able to answer well. Is it possible to set up a trading mark for products that indicates slave-free products, for example, on the garments that we buy?
Yeah, really interesting question, and something we hear a lot actually about other products from around the world, for example, cocoa from West Africa and so on. It's very, very difficult to do so, because to be able to say with that guarantee this is a slave-free product, forced labor and child labor is so prevalent that really that requires very significant reassurances. What I would suggest is to flip it over and to put the responsibility on the businesses. So what we are, for example, calling for is businesses to commit to the call to action. That is how they can provide that reassurance to all of us as consumers, NGOs and others, that they are taking all credible steps within their control to ensure their supply chains are not linked to forced labor of Uyghurs. In addition to that, if we speak a bit more broadly as well, we as Anti-Slavery International are calling for laws which would make companies legally responsible to take all steps within their supply chain to prevent human rights abuses. This will be absolutely fundamental for Uyghur forced labor as well as other forced labor issues. And I'm sure Mr. Glucksmann might want to have a word there, because he's working very actively on this agenda to get the EU law to this front introduced. We're also calling for laws in the UK and the EU that would ban the imports of goods produced with Uyghur forced labor. And these steps together would be really, really important in order to move towards that slave-free guarantee that you might look for from a trademark. But really, we need to put the emphasis on the responsibility of the brands and retailers to take all the action they can.
Do you want to jump in there, Mr. Glucksmann?
Yeah, with pleasure. I mean, the global world as it is now is a pyramid of irresponsibility. Basically, the most powerful among us, like the stakeholders of big multinational companies and the CEOs of brands like Zara or Nike, they are making lots of money out of a system in which they can avoid any form of responsibility. So the idea of due diligence is very simple. It's to put back responsibility in this pyramid of irresponsibility. And the idea is that, well, you own a brand, you make money out of a value chain, then you will be responsible for the entirety of your value chain. And if there is slavery in your value chain, then you have to respond to justice. And that's the only way we can actually achieve a change and make sure there is no slavery in today's things we are buying. Because if we just count on campaigns and on responsibility of brands, it will be an endless fight. What we need is legislations. I mean, we have institutions for that. And we need to pass this. That will be a revolution in terms of how the world is shaped today. But we need to pass this legislation at a European level so that there is an impact on the global market. And so that at the end of the day, if Zara has slaves working on their clothes, then Zara will be responsible for it, even if it's under a supplier like Wafu. And that's the only solution we have, legally speaking, to put an end to this, and to make sure that when we buy a shirt, we are not co-responsible or accomplice of a crime against humanity, because that's the situation now. If I want to go to Zara and I buy a shirt, what am I doing actually? I'm buying a shirt in which slavery is part of the production system. So what does it mean? And the only way to respond to that is to have this due diligence legislation and to make sure that responsibility is back. And for this to happen, because of the lobbying powers that oppose this kind of legislation, of course, we need public involvement. Because if the debate is just in this parliament, in this room, honestly, I have much more powerful people than me that will fight against it. But if we have public attention, and if consumers make their voice heard, if citizens make their voice heard, then we have a chance to push for that, because it's fitting also the change of attitude of consumers. They don't want to be part of crimes. They don't want to destroy the environment by putting $25 or $40 in a shirt. They want to have an explanation on how this is free from slavery, how this is respecting some rights when it's produced. So I think that's really a fight that we should all unite our strengths behind it, because it's a possibility to actually show that we can do something about this world.
Thank you, Mr. Glucksmann. An interesting questions come in that we get pretty often, actually, is people expressing deep concern and horror of what is going on, but wondering what the alternative is. So this person says, I'm not for the horrific working conditions in some parts of the world, but aren't they better than more horrific options, such as starvation if there is no work? Would one of you like to jump in and answer that question?
It looks like I can say something, maybe.
Thanks, Rahima.
Yeah, starvation is extremely a very sad situation, of course, you know. But when your liberty is completely taken away from you, I think that is worse than starvation. From my own opinion, this is just my opinion. Of course, you know, is a basic, you know, for human or to be able to have enough food is extremely very basic thing. But a regime locking up millions of people and chain them, shackle them, humiliate them, torture them, and women being raped, sterilized. This is also very horrific.
Thank you, Rahima. I think that answers that question perfectly, unless anybody else wants to chime in on that.
Can I just say one thing?
Of course.
I will be short. Yes, sir. We are not speaking about poor people that are offered the choice of either working in these horrific conditions or die out of hunger. This is political. This is not connected to underdevelopment. This is not even connected to the absence of social rights. This is political. This is a crime against humanity organized by a state, a very powerful and developed state. This is the will to reduce the people, millions, the people of millions of individuals into slavery. So this is not like, for instance, when we say in an underdeveloped country, you have the choice between working in horrific conditions or die out of hunger. No, this is a region that could be rich and that's reduced to slavery because of political will of political decisions by the state of China and by the Chinese Communist Party. So this is a different topic. And this is a crime against humanity we are speaking about that could be stopped, and that could be stopped any second by those who are perpetrating it.
Thanks so much, Mr. Glucksmann. So just one final question from the audience. If they can do one thing right after this, what is the most important thing that they could go and do right away after hearing everything that we've heard today?
Well, I can answer, but I'll be answering very much on behalf of my colleagues here in the call. Anti-slavery, we're not directly part of the Week of Action, but very much will point all the fingers towards it. So I think just to look at what Freedom United, Workers Rights Consortium, World Uyghur Congress, Uyghur Human Rights Project, Free Uyghur Now, and look at what they're all doing, their Week of Action and so on. And that's really the best thing to do this week. And there's a whole multitude of steps, and in addition, continue to follow all of our work long-term. Anti-Slavery International, for example, we're very much looking at how to push for these laws, which Mr. Glucksmann talked about. So there'll be more actions coming in the future too. Jewher, do you want to add about the Week of Action, because you're more involved than I am?
I really recommend people to, as I mentioned earlier, visit the forcedlaborfaction.org. To follow more information on the Week of Action, and also just another simple action is to support your local Uyghur communities. If you would like to order food, order from Uyghur restaurants. If you would like to purchase clothes, order from Uyghur-owned businesses, and post on your social media, tag your friends, educate people around you about this cause. And if you're based in the U.S., help pushing the Uyghur Forced Labor Prevention Act. And if you're from Europe, help pushing the mechanism for due diligence. And I'm sure there are other countries who are also have similar policies. And there's so much more you can, so many more ways you can be involved. And please visit the coalition website as well to learn more actions on this matter, to help on this matter. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Jewher. And I think that the links to those websites that Jewher mentioned were just dropped in the chat. That's all the questions we have time for today. But I'd like to extend, Rahima, please.
Yeah, I would like also to add what people can do. I mean, our campaign is based in the UK. If anyone in the UK that join the Stop Uyghurs Genocide campaign and join Uyghur Solidarity campaign, for example, Saturday we have a protest against Nike. So very simple thing that you can do is that visit those websites, sign petitions, whatever petitions you see, and multiply our voices, basically to speak to more people, raise awareness, educate more people. That is very, very important. And follow us, follow me on Twitter, follow us, and join any, basically even just retweet any articles that is about the Uyghur issue. And that can be helpful. So there are many, many things that people can do from, from very simple things.
Thanks so much, Rahima. And thank you to everybody. Thank you to our wonderful panelists, Mr. Raphaël Glucksmann, Chloe Cranston, and especially to Jewher and Rahima, who are joining, speaking on an extremely personal issue. We're very, very grateful for your participation in this panel. I'll pass back to Joanna.
Thank each and every one of you for joining us today. We were overwhelmed with the response. We had over 700 people register for this event and joining, many hundreds of you joining our panel discussion today. Please do share what's going on. Use the hashtag Forced Labour Fashion. Today, of course, is International Day for the Abolition of Slavery. It's a great day to open a conversation about this, encourage others to get involved, to learn about it, sign a petition. The links are in the chat. The overarching one that we mentioned at the beginning is on freedomunited.org. Thank you once again to all of our panelists. Thank you for attending, for your support, and goodbye.